class. So now I'll be discussing the second novel of Jose Rizal, which is El Filibusterismo. So first, let us look at the title, which literally means the revolution, because it signifies a movement which had been severely punished by the government. So we can see from what had happened in the first novel, the abuses of the government that time. So in this novel, Rizal wanted to provide a different alternative to avert such type of movement. The other concept of revolution, which he had been talking about. It also explained the reason why revolution takes place. The cover, as you can see, depicts the three martyred priests, the Gumbursa, Father Mariano Gomez, Father Jose Burgos, and Father Jacinto Zamora. They were executed in their campaign because of their opinion regarding the secularization of their parishes, and thus they were implicated in the Cavite Mutiny. They were garroted at Luneta on February 17, 1872. And El Filibusterismo was written in dedication to the three martyred priests because their death left an indelible mark in the mind of Rizal. Like Nole Me Tangere, El Filibusterismo aims at enlightening the society, of bringing Filipinos closer to the truth of what had really happened and their implications. But while in the first novel, we are encouraged to ask and aspire for change and liberation, this novel is used by Rizal as a means to urge the society to open its eyes to the reality. And there is already that brave call to rebel against the Spanish government because of its oppression and abuse. So it's a long time story of oppression. So we know that the Spanish had colonized the country for 333 years, and that's very long. In Noli Me Tangere, there is that aspiration. There is beauty, there's even romance and mercy. But in El Filibusterismo, while reading it, you will feel that there is that bitterness, there is hatred, there is antipathy. And the romance, the aspiration, the concept of we can do this in a very peaceful manner are gone. And even the personalities of the characters had also undergone radical change. This is how different Rizal's second novel is, considering that both were written by the same author, the plots and poles apart. And if you have already seen the video I sent you last time regarding the travels of Rizal and the different events that had transpired during those periods, you can also have at least a glimpse of why there is that change. We know that in reality, most of the time we are being changed by our experiences. So in the same way, the perspective of Rizal had also changed based on the events in his life, his struggles, and at the same time, what had been happening in the country while he was studying abroad. Outright scorn and bitterness may already be felt even at the beginning of the story, where you can see Simon promoting that abuse and that tyranny in the Spanish government in the hope that people will reach the limits of their endurance and declare a revolution. So the concept of triggering that revolution. Simon, whom we know, is actually Noles Ibarra in disguise, conveys an entirely different personality in El Filibusterismo. So it's about that radical transformation, the change that had happened because of the constant oppression that the country is experiencing. While Ibarra is trusting, aspiring, and loving, the character of Simon is contrary with that. Simon is now cunningly careful in his dealings, distrusting, and extremely bitter. Something changed in Rizal, and that change is reflected in the personalities that he gave in El Filibusterismo's character. So we have seen in the Noli that actually the characters were carefully thought of so that they become representation of the different types of people in the society. Jose Rizal began writing his second novel, El Filibusterismo, or The Grain of Greed, years after the publication of Noli Me Tangere, which we know means the social cancer, or literally Touch Me Not. His inspiration in writing both novels were the social, the economic, the political, and the religious conditions existing during those times. 4 years after the Noli Me Tangere was published, he published El Filibusterismo. The first talked about the friars and the Spaniards' abuses, and the later talked about the gravity and the unhindered abuses of the authority. Rizal began printing of what he had entitled El Filibusterismo early in July 1891, and it was in October 1887 when Jose Rizal started writing El Filibusterismo, and it took him 3 years and 5 places to finish his second novel. So the plot, as you can imagine, is also a witness of what he would usually reflect upon based on what he is seeing, based on what he had encountered, the types of culture and the people he had been dealing with. Unlike the first novel, which was written in three European countries, a part of El Filibusterismo was actually written in the Philippines. Jose Rizal properly put into words what his eyes and heart could no longer contain. And he was able to apply his literary prowess for the purpose of pouring out those burning within him and bringing into the open those facts that only few could see. So, if you can relate it with the present, it is somehow easier now to express our thoughts. We know that we have the right to speak what's in our mind. But before, speaking about the truth is not that easy. It requires courage, it requires skill to be able to put into words, and in the case of Rizal, even in the form of a novel, what he wanted to convey to the people. And because of what he had done, we have seen that what we are learning in the Philippine history is actually real. So those things that he witnessed during his, for instance, short visit in Calamba triggered him to start writing the sequel to the Noli Me Tangere. And this time, though he had wrote it or he had written it in an angrier passion, there is that sense of anger which had also inspired or sparked the revolution. The evicting of his father, the taking over of their house, the dumping their furnitures into the street, the sending some of his family members to exile, the denial of a Christian burial to his brother in law, all of these opened up his eyes. So even Rizal experienced those injustices. In the words of Porino that the attitude of the authorities and the friars on the granting of reforms was irreversible, that they had really got no intention to grant us that freedom. And so we have to do something if we are to defend our sovereignty as a country. Right there and then, while Jose Rizal was in Calamba practicing medicine, he started writing his second novel. Leaving the Philippines, he continues with his effort, and when he was in London, he made some changes and corrections to his work. And then more chapters were written in Paris and Madrid. And finally, the manuscript was finished in Beatrice. So he was not able to finish it in just one place. In July 1891, Jose Rizal left Brussels for Ghent, Belgium's university city. He had reasons in going to Ghent. First is that the printing cost in Ghent was cheaper than in Brussels, and we know from the reporting of the previous group about his attraction with Suzanne. So he wanted to flee from that. On the 18th of September 1891, El Filibusterismo was over and done with. But the joyous Jose Rizal sent the printed copies for Basa and Lopez in Hong Kong, and to Valentin Ventura, who was the savior of the novel. He gave the original manuscript and a printed copy of the book which he autographed. And other copies were sent to Ferdinand Blumentritt, Mariano Ponce, and other friends. And if you can imagine, if you're one of the friends of Rizal that time, receiving the copies, the original copies, are really an honor. So the El Filibusterismo was well praised by Filipinos, both in the Philippines and in foreign lands, because undeniably it's a work of a genius. So the theme or the moving force in El Filibusterismo, please take note of this, is the greed for power. And in the preface, he had written that dedication to the memory of the priest Don Mariano Gomez, 65 years old, Don Jose Burgos, 30 years old, very young, and Don Jacinto Zamora, 35 years old, who inspired him to write this novel. Executed in the scaffold in Bagong Bayan on February 17, 1872. So the religion, by refusing to degrade you, has put in doubt the crime that has been attributed to you. The government, by surrounding your cause in mystery and shadows, has made belief possible in some errors committed in fatal moments, and all of Filipinos, by venerating your memory and calling you martyrs, does not in any manner accept your guilt. So he wanted to highlight that there is that big fault committed. That's why you can also see in a lot of reflections and analysis about the writings of Rizal, it's actually a good um, point of reflection so that we can learn from the events in the past. So, are we actually learning from the lessons in our past, from the struggles of the heroes before us, both the heroes we know and we don't know? So, in so far, therefore, that your participation in the Cavite protest is not clearly shown whether you are patriots or not, I have the right to dedicate to you my work as victims of the evil that I am trying to combat. And while we are waiting for Spain to rehabilitate you one day and to refuse to be a party to your death, let these pages serve as a belated wreath of dry leaves over your forgotten graves. And whoever attacks your memory without evident without any evident proof stains his hands with your blood. So we can see that he had geniusly put words into the point that he wanted to for he wanted us to understand, and was really trying to explain that they are unjustly tried and there was injustice. And it's also something to reflect upon that the novel of Rizal, generally his words and even his life, are ways of immortalizing that once in the period, once in the history of the Philippines, we have this one soul who had been writing for enlightenment, for freedom, and to inspire people to love our country. So thank you so much, class, and I'll be discussing in the next session or presentation the characters of El Filibusterismo.